Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling cases in rural Ohio's documented history. Please let me know where you're watching from and when you first heard this story in the comments section before we start. We want to know where these recorded accounts come from and what time of day or night they arrive. Until the spring of 1901, most residents in Morgan County, Ohio, had no idea what Charlotte Deering was. Located on the outskirts of McConnellville, a small village tucked away along the banks of the Muskingum River, was the humble farmhouse she inherited from her late husband. With its weathered porch and peeling paint, the white clapboard building appeared to be just another old homestead in the undulating southeastern Ohio countryside. On the 17th of April 1901, a worried neighbor who hadn't noticed any activity at the Deering residence for about 2 weeks called in local doctor, Dr. James Caldwell. The doctor knocked, but no one responded. A single window at the back of the house had been left slightly open, but the front door was closed. The fragrance was evident from the moment you entered. It wasn't the overpowering smell of decay, but rather something more subdued and unnerving, which Dr. Caldwell would later characterize as medicinal and wrong in his report. There were no dishes in the sink or food on the counters, and the kitchen was spotless. The parlor was similarly undisturbed, as if it had been set up for visitors who never came. Dr. Caldwell didn't find the main clue to one of Ohio's most unsettling historical mysteries until he made his way up the tiny stairs to the second story. Charlotte Deering lay in bed in the master bedroom, her body eerily preserved, her eyes open. There was a small brown bottle with no name and an empty glass on her bedside. However, it was what Dr. Caldwell discovered in the bedroom next door that made him call the county sheriff right away. Facing the window were 2 identical rocking rockers. A tiny table between them held 2 bone-dry teacups, and a single-framed picture of 2 similar women wearing identical outfits with their expressionless faces staring into the camera was displayed on the wall. Charlotte and Caroline, 1873, is written in exact handwriting on the reverse of the picture. Charlotte Deering, however, had no sibling, according to all local records. Since her husband Thomas's death in 1896, she had been living alone in the farmhouse. No twin had ever been mentioned in McConnellville. Neither the church registers nor the county census included any information about a Caroline Deering. It appeared as though one half of the couple in the picture had just been removed from the record. A pattern of strange events dating back decades, a trail of documentation that left more questions than answers, and a community that appeared to be determined to forget what they knew about the 2 women who had lived in the remote farmhouse on the outskirts of town, were all revealed by the subsequent investigation. According to the first coroner's report, Charlotte Deering overdosed on laudanum and committed suicide. However, a few days later, a secret compartment in the farmhouse basement was found, pointing to something far more intricate and unsettling. The room was filled with dozens of identical garments hanging side by side, 2 identical drawers, and 2 identical beds. Investigators also discovered a notebook under a loose floorboard, the first of many records that will eventually help piece together the Deering twins' bizarre past and the horrible secret they had kept for almost 30 years. The photograph and the diary both started in 1873. The handwriting was in 2 different styles, one stiff and precise, the other flowing and elaborate. However, both captured the same unsettling ideas. "We must never be seen together. 1 June 1873. Entry stated. The arrangement works perfectly. The townspeople suspect nothing. To them we are one person, appearing and disappearing as needed. Charlotte goes to market on Tuesdays. I handle church on Sundays. No one can tell the difference. It is better this way." Charlotte Wilson married Thomas Deering in 1870 when she was 23 years old, based on the limited civil papers available at the time. The couple was described by neighbors as quiet but friendly. As a carpenter, Thomas frequently spent weeks at a time traveling to nearby counties for business. Charlotte was known to be a little withdrawn. She rarely entertained guests at the farmhouse and turned down most social invites. No one in McConnellville knew no one was supposed to know that the house was occupied by 2 women, each of whom alternated as Charlotte Deering. The journal entries show an organized system to the outer world. One sister would stay hidden in the house, while the other would go out into town as Charlotte. To keep their ruse a secret, they would share details about discussions and interactions. "Today Mrs. Abernathy mentioned the new hat I was wearing last Sunday," a sister wrote. "I thanked her, though of course it was C who attended services last week. Must remember to wear the blue hat next time I go to town." However, the diary entry's tone had shifted by 1880. The sister wrote, "She is becoming difficult," in a precise handwriting style. Says she's tired of hiding, tired of pretending. Threatens to reveal our arrangement. This cannot happen. We've come too far. Sheriff William Dalton questioned several of McConnellville's oldest citizens about the Deering family when the journal was found. The couple had kept to themselves, and most people knew very little. However, in 1901, Edith Forrester, who was almost 90 years old, remembered something peculiar about the day of Charlotte and Thomas's marriage. "I remember seeing her before the ceremony," Edith said to the sheriff. "She was standing alone behind the church talking to herself. But the strange thing was, it didn't look like talking. It looked like she was having a conversation, the way her head would tilt and her hands would move, like she was speaking to someone who wasn't there or wasn't visible to me, at least." Thomas Daring acquired 40 further acres of land next to the old property in 1883. He planned to build an addition to his house and perhaps establish a small orchard, according to the deed of sale that is still in the county archives. In the spring of that year, construction got underway. A number of local men were employed to assist with the framing and foundation. When the inquiry started in 1901, one of those men, Joseph Blackwell, was still alive. His memory was jumbled at 76, but some things were still clear. "Thomas had us build a second staircase," he said, "hidden behind a false wall in the pantry. Said it was so his wife could move between floors without disturbing guests. Thought it was odd at the time, but he paid well, so we built it just as he asked." By the fall of 1883, the improvements were finished. The secret stairway led to a new portion of the second floor, which had a living area and bedroom that could only be reached via this secret tunnel. With no windows visible facing the road or nearby homes, this section of the house looked from the outside to be a slightly expanded roofline. The sisters' increasing hostility is reflected in the journal entries from this time period. The exact hand wrote, "The new arrangement provides more freedom, but C is still dissatisfied. Says she deserves a life of her own, not half of mine." Thomas tries to mediate, but his loyalty is divided. He created this solution for us, but it cannot fix what is broken within her. The 1,880 seconds were a prosperous time for Thomas Daring's business, based on tax documents. He started accepting contracts for bigger projects, such as the new McConnellville courthouse, and hired more staff. Due to his greater success, he was able to travel more frequently and give the twins' meticulous system more chances to start to fall apart. It appears from the 1,888 diary entries that Carolyn, if that was her name, because it never occurs in any official record, had started to show up in town on days when Charlotte was also in town. She defied our agreement again. The March entry of that year states, "Mrs. Parker from the Mercantile asked me about my visit yesterday, though I hadn't left the house in 3 days. C is becoming reckless, says she's tired of being a ghost." The McConnellville Herald, the local newspaper, reported an odd episode in October 1888. A number of residents said they saw Charlotte Daring at the general shop and at church at the same time. Although the diary entries indicate otherwise, the paper rejected the accounts as being confused or misidentified. The incident has caused talk. Thomas is furious, says we must be more careful or everything will be ruined. What did Thomas Daring know exactly? It is never made clear in the journal when he learned of his wife's identical twin or whether he had known from the start. However, it appears from the writings that he was willing to help keep their secret. T says we cannot continue this way, and 1,889 entry states. His suggestion was to relocate west and start again somewhere no one knows us, somewhere we could both exist in the open. However, the relocation never took place. The strain is too great. People are starting to notice. Rather, the entries depict a growing sequence of disputes among the sisters, with Thomas caught in the midst of them. By 1890, the journal is dominated by the exact handwriting. The flowing script is less often, and, when it does occur, it is altered, unpredictable, and urgent. An example of such an entry is, "She keeps me locked away when T is gone. Says I've become a liability. This isn't what we agreed. I never wanted to disappear completely." Thomas Daring submitted an odd document to the county clerk in February 1890. A request for details on the legislation pertaining to the confinement and treatment of mentally ill individuals. There is no documentation of any reaction or follow-up activity. Although neighbors never saw any outside alterations to the property, Thomas placed an unusual order for building materials in April of that year, enough to undertake major inside repairs. During the 1901 investigation, records from the local pharmacist revealed that Thomas started buying chloral hydrate and laudanum on a regular basis at about the same time. These sedatives, which are frequently prescribed for sleeplessness and neurological disorders, were ordered in amounts that suggested more frequent use. There are very few diary entries from this time period, and they are all written in exact handwriting. The new room is completed. T says it's necessary. Just until she calms down. Her outbursts have become dangerous. Last week, she threatened to go into town and tell everyone, "What choice do we have?" Charlotte Daring made an uncommon public appearance during the Harvest Festival in McConnellville in September 1890. Later, a number of participants recalled her peculiar conduct, which alternated between enthusiastic conversation and withdrawn silence. She occasionally seemed to forget the names of individuals she had known for years. Even though it was warm outside, she refused to take off her gloves while eating. That night's journal entry states, "Festival went as well as could be expected. Wore the gloves to hide the scratches. She's becoming violent in her desperation. T increased her dosage yesterday, which kept her docile enough for me to attend. Despite this, a number of people made comments about her distracted demeanor. Inquiring about her health, Mrs. Holloway stated that she seemed changed, must be more careful." Thomas Daring hired a local craftsman in December 1890 to design a unique lock for an interior door that was inaccessible from the inside. During the 1901 investigation, the receipt for this peculiar item was discovered among Thomas's files. The lock's installation site and purpose had not been documented by the artisan, who was long since dead. In southeastern Ohio, the winter of 1891 was exceptionally severe. For weeks at a time, a lot of rural estates were cut off by heavy snowfall. The farmhouse was described as peaceful at last in the journal entries from this time period, and a new routine that appeared to please everyone was mentioned. She has accepted her limitations. 1 January 1891 entry mentions, "The medication helps. T says this arrangement can work as long as we're consistent and careful. No one needs to know." Thomas Daring started turning down bigger contracting tasks in the spring of 1891 in favor of smaller, local projects. He appeared hesitant to spend evenings away from the farmhouse, according to the neighbors. When he had to make a trip, he would frequently ask Reverend Milligan to see how Charlotte was doing. However, the Reverend was never asked inside. Instead, he was only instructed to put food on the porch. The 1895 journal entries document a peculiarly settled era. Using her or she less frequently occurs. Rather, the postings concentrate on everyday domestic issues, Thomas's artistic endeavors, and seasonal observations. However, cryptic remarks that allude to the other sister's ongoing existence are interspersed throughout. "She's been quiet this month, barely speaks even when I read to her." Then, T says, "We should let her have more books. The boredom makes her difficult." Thomas Daring became ill with pneumonia in January 1896. After being called to the farmhouse, Dr. Caldwell claimed he was only permitted to examine his patient in the parlor downstairs. Thomas's condition deteriorated in spite of treatment. On the 3rd of February 1896, He passed away. One line sums up that day's journal entry. He's gone now. There is only us. After Thomas passed away, Charlotte Daring grew even more withdrawn. She paid local guys to do outdoor chores, had groceries delivered instead of going into town, and was hardly ever seen outside her home. According to the few encounters neighbors did report, she seemed anxious, distracted, and older than her years. The journal entries after Thomas's passing indicate that the sisters' relationship has changed significantly. An entry from March 1896 states, "Without tea to moderate, our arrangement has shifted. She resents my freedom, limited though it is, says it should be my turn to stay inside after all these years. She still doesn't understand what's at stake." Charlotte Daring complained of worry and insomnia in late 1896 and asked Dr. Caldwell to visit her home. He suggested rest and ordered laudanum. The doctor recorded in his files that he heard strange sounds coming from the upper floor during this visit, such as furniture being moved. Charlotte dismissed his worry when he asked, claiming that the home frequently settled in unusual ways. Charlotte placed increasing orders for laudanum from the McConnellville Pharmacy between 1897 and 1898. The pharmacist started diluting the preparation because he was worried about the amounts, but he never told the authorities about his worries. During this time, the diary entries became inconsistent, occasionally showing up every day before going missing for weeks or months. More often than not, the handwriting alternates between the two styles, occasionally changing in the middle of an entry. She's growing stronger despite everything. 1 August 1898 entry states, "Yesterday she nearly made it to the front door before I could stop her. Had to increase the dose again. And then, with a different hand, this cannot continue. One way or another, it ends soon." After Charlotte neglected to pick up a parcel from the church charity drive in January 1899, Reverend Milligan paid a rare visit to the Deering farmhouse. He later stated that, in spite of the blazing fire, Charlotte met him wearing a heavy shawl and admitted him only to the parlor. Even though Charlotte had maintained she lived alone, he could clearly hear floorboards creaking overhead throughout their brief talk. She immediately ended the visit, stating that she needed to rest when he asked her about the sounds. Early 1899 journal entries point to a rapidly worsening situation. "She refuses the medicine now unless I take it first to prove it's not poisoned. Had to resort to putting it in her food, but she's becoming suspicious, eating less, and then found her trying to pry open the window again. The boards hold for now, but her determination grows with her desperation. What will happen when she finally escapes?" Charlotte placed an unusual order in April 1899 for enough non-perishable food supplies, flour, sugar, and canned foods, to last several months. Although he only saw Charlotte, the delivery boy who delivered them to the house claimed to have heard arguing voices coming from an upper window. There is growing disarray in the journal entries from May 1899 to March 1901. Some parts of the handwriting are hard to see, and the ideas are disjointed and suspicious. "She watches me constantly. I see her eyes following me even when she pretends to sleep. And the house knows. The walls have absorbed our secret for so long they've become part of it. Sometimes I think I hear them whispering when I'm alone. But I'm never truly alone, am I?" The last item, dated the 3rd of April 1901, is written in the increasingly rare flowing hand. "After all these years, I finally understand. There's only one way to truly be free. One of us must cease to exist. I've made my choice. By the time anyone finds this, it will be done. I wonder if anyone will notice the difference, or if perhaps there never really was one." Several more diaries were found concealed throughout the Deering farmhouse during a comprehensive search by Sheriff Dalton and his officers in late April 1901. Some were inside hollowed-out books, some under floorboards, and still others nestled between mattresses. When taken as a whole, they created a horrifying portrait of decades of deceit, manipulation, and escalating strife. When they eventually broke into a locked room on the 3rd floor, an attic area that had been turned into a bedroom, that was the most concerning finding, though. This room was a mess, Unlike the rest of the house, the lone bed was flipped over and the walls were splattered with fingernail-like marks and scrapes. They also discovered a last journal beneath a loose panel in the corner. Written entirely in the flowing hand, this journal's writing suggested a totally different interpretation of what had happened in the farmhouse and conflicted with a lot of what was written in the other journals. "She keeps me prisoner," appeared in one 1897 entry. "Claims it's for my own protection, but I know the truth. She wants my life for herself. Always has. Thomas tried to help me, but she's poisoned him against me. Says I'm unstable, dangerous. The irony is unbearable." The last chapters detailed a meticulous, deliberate approach that had taken years to develop. "I've been saving the medicine, pretending to swallow, but hiding it instead, a little each day. Store it away for when the time is right. Soon I'll have enough. Then we'll switch places one last time. She thinks she's the only one who can play our game, but she's wrong. I've watched her for years. I know exactly how to be Charlotte Deering, and once she's gone, no one will ever know the difference." Although Charlotte Dering's cause of death was officially reported as laudanum overdose in the coroner's updated report, which was released in May 1901, it was not possible to definitively decide whether it was homicide or suicide. Even worse, it was unable to determine with certainty which of the Deering twins had passed away. Naturally, in 1901, there was no such thing as DNA testing. A little birthmark behind the right ear and a healed fracture of the left wrist were the only distinguishing features found during the autopsy. However, these offered no definitive identification in the absence of medical data for comparison. Newspapers in Ohio briefly covered the case, but President McKinley's assassination in September 1901 swiftly eclipsed it. By the end of the year, the Deering mystery had been reduced to local folklore and had vanished from the public awareness. The farmhouse was abandoned until 1904, when a Pennsylvania family who were unaware of its past bought it. Despite doing substantial repairs, including eliminating the hidden stairway and turning the loft into storage space, they experienced no weird events during their 15 years of ownership. Margaret Holloway, a doctoral student at Ohio University, discovered the Deering case in 1928 while investigating rural crime in southeast Ohio for her thesis. As a result of her research, she discovered a tiny set of records, including some of the original journals and Dr. Caldwell's medical notes that had been saved in the Morgan County Historical Society archives. In his later work, Doubled Identity, The Deering Twins, and the Psychology of Isolation, Holloway hypothesized that the whole situation could have been a complex case of mental illness. It's possible that there was only ever one Deering lady who externalized her fractured personality into the idea that she was a twin. One could explain the alternating handwriting, the hidden rooms, and the two wardrobes as signs of a broken mind. However, Holloway's hypothesis was called into question when she came upon an 1,847 baptismal record from Zanesville, Ohio, that had been disregarded before. It recorded the birth of Charlotte and Carolyn, twin girls to William and Eleanor Wilson. Carolyn disappears from all official records after the family reportedly relocated to McConnellville while the girls were little. Holloway added the Wilson family history to her investigation after making this discovery. William Wilson had been a merchant in Zanesville, according to county records, before moving to McConnellville in 1855 to start a general shop. Before her name vanishes from the membership lists in 1860, Eleanor Wilson is listed in church records as an active member of the Methodist congregation. Cemetery records indicate a burial in the McConnellville Cemetery in November of that year, with no cause of death listed, but no death certificate could be located. William Wilson kept his store open until 1864, when he sold it and relocated to Columbus. Intriguingly, the 1,870 census shows that he lived alone in a boarding house there, and that his occupation was retired merchant. No daughter is mentioned as living with him, indicating that Charlotte was either living alone or possibly already living with her sister in some unrecorded arrangement by the time she married Thomas Deering. As a result of her research, Holloway spoke with a number of senior citizens in McConnellville who remembered the Wilson family from their early years. The majority of memories were hazy. Time had distorted the facts. A recurring theme, however, was that the Wilson daughters were kept close to home and were not frequently spotted together in the city. According to an old woman who had grown up next door to the Wilsons, her mother once said that one of those girls wasn't right in the head, but she was unable to specify which girl or what was meant by this statement. Francis Miller, who had worked as a clerk in William Wilson's business as a young man, gave the most fascinating narrative. He wrote to Holloway in a letter, "I remember the Wilson girls from when I worked for their father. They looked exactly alike, but you could tell them apart if you knew them well. Charlotte was the quiet one, always proper and careful. Caroline was louder, more likely to say whatever came to mind. Mr. Wilson seemed harder on her because of it. After Mrs. Wilson passed, I rarely saw Caroline at all. When I asked after her, Mr. Wilson would just say she was indisposed or resting. Eventually, people stopped asking." The Great Depression caused Holloway to give up her academic endeavors in favor of more useful work, interrupting her studies. Just before she passed away in 1965, the Ohio Historical Society received her notes and a portion of her manuscript. Until a sealed letter from Thomas Daring was found during courtroom renovations in 1952, they were mainly forgotten. What Holloway had started to piece together, that the Wilson twins had remained distinct individuals, but that one had been essentially removed from the public record, was confirmed for the first time in writing by this letter. Shortly after his marriage, Thomas wrote about his initial shock at learning the truth. "I had been wed but a month when I first encountered Caroline. I had returned home unexpectedly from a job in Malta to find a woman I presumed to be my wife sitting in the garden. When I approached and spoke, her reaction was one of startled confusion. She called me by name but seemed uncertain about how to interact with me. It was only when Charlotte herself emerged from the house moments later, identical in every physical aspect, that I understood the deception I had unwittingly married into." Thomas claims that the agreement existed before he was married. It seems that after their mother passed away, William Wilson had determined that Caroline's erratic conduct and emotional instability were too dangerous for the family's reputation in the neighborhood. Instead of placing her in an institution, which would have been the standard remedy at the time, he devised a system in which the twins would alternate roles, with only one of them ever appearing in public. "Charlotte explained to me that it began as a temporary measure," wrote Thomas, "meant to shield Caroline from gossip during what their father termed difficult periods. But as the years passed, the arrangement became permanent. Caroline was gradually withdrawn from public view entirely. By the time I met and courted Charlotte, the fiction that there was only one Wilson daughter had been maintained for nearly a decade." Thomas explained his moral dilemma after discovering the truth. "My first impulse was to alert the authorities, for surely this forced seclusion was a form of imprisonment. Yet when I suggested as much, both sisters became distraught. Charlotte insisted that this arrangement protected Caroline from being committed to an asylum, a fate she described in such horrific terms that I could not dispute her logic. And Caroline, despite occasional resentment of her confinement, seemed equally terrified by the prospect of institutional care." Thomas decided to keep the sisters secret, whether out of sympathy or deceit. In order to suit their unconventional living situation, he bought the remote farmhouse on the outskirts of McConnellville after they were married. Caroline had more flexibility to walk around outside without worrying about being found because of the larger acreage and the distance from neighbors. The letter sheds light on the three of them's complicated connection. "In many ways, I have become husband to both, though in name only to Charlotte. My affections are divided, my loyalties constantly tested. Charlotte possesses a certain coldness, a rigid propriety that seems to have developed from years of maintaining their facade. Caroline displays a warmth and spontaneity that her sister lacks, yet her moods are mercurial, her behavior at times concerning." Thomas explained how the sisters' relative influence changed throughout time. "In the early years of our marriage, they maintained a relative equality, trading days in town, sharing responsibilities. But gradually, Charlotte has assumed greater control. She speaks of protecting Caroline, of managing her episodes. Yet I sometimes wonder if her concern is truly for her sister's welfare or for maintaining the life she has constructed for herself. Caroline increasingly resents these limitations. Their conflicts grow more heated, their reconciliations more brief. An unsettling foreshadowing concludes the letter. I fear what may happen should I no longer be present to mediate between them. Charlotte's determination can border on cruelty. Caroline's desperation may lead her to dangerous action. I have considered confiding in our physician or minister, but what solution could they offer that would not destroy all three of us? For now, we continue our strange arrangement, prisoners of a secret that has grown too large to escape. Thomas may have realized that telling the truth would have repercussions that none of them were ready for, which is why he never sent this letter. Rather, he persisted in facilitating and controlling the situation until his passing in 1896, at which point the meticulous equilibrium he had upheld rapidly disintegrated, as evidenced by the journals he left behind in 1901. When the historic McConnellville courthouse was being renovated in 1952, workmen found a locked metal box hidden inside a wall. A letter from 1874, allegedly written by Thomas Daring to his lawyer, but never sent, was found inside. It detailed Thomas's disturbing discovery soon after marriage, that his wife, Charlotte, had an identical twin sister who had been kept hidden since childhood because of what the family called unpredictable behaviors and dangerous tendencies. Thomas explained that instead of disclosing the secret, he had decided to assist in keeping it a secret, in part because he loved Charlotte, in part because he was afraid of scandal, and in part because he had grown to care for Caroline as well. It seems cruel to subject either of them to institutional confinement, wrote the man, when our arrangement, though unorthodox, allows both some measure of dignity and comfort. The note continues, yet I fear the strain of this deception weighs heavily on all of us. Charlotte grows increasingly protective, Caroline increasingly resentful. I find myself mediating between them constantly, trying to ensure fair treatment while maintaining our secret. Some days I wonder if I've done them both a disservice by enabling this charade rather than seeking proper help. But what help would society offer two women like them? One would surely be condemned to an asylum, and which one should suffer that fate? The one who happens to have been seen second? The one whose temperament is less suited to public interaction? I cannot make such a choice. The Daring case gained new attention once Thomas's letter was found. Historian Edward Morrison thoroughly examined asylum records across Ohio in 1953, looking for any reference to Caroline Wilson. He discovered a pattern of young women from respectable families being committed for behaviors characterized as hysteria, moral insanity, or nervous disposition. Vacuous terms that could include anything from simple nonconformity to social expectations to actual mental illness, but he was unable to draw any firm conclusions. Morrison's investigation led him to speculate that William Wilson's choice to conceal his daughter instead of institutionalizing her might have been influenced by his personal experience with the circumstances in such institutions. Wilson would have had access to the adjacent Athens Lunatic Asylum during his brief tenure on a county oversight committee for public institutions in 1858-1859, according to records. Maybe what he saw there made him decide that it was more humanitarian to hide Carolyn at home, even if it meant lying. Morrison also discovered a fascinating fact in the medical records of Dr. Samuel Warren, who worked at McConnellville from 1845 and 1865. One item from 1860 inches. His patient logs described Eleanor Wilson's treatment for melancholia following difficult confinement. It stated that Mrs. Wilson had been prescribed laudanum for ongoing distress related to her daughter's illness. This implies that Eleanor Wilson's worries about one of her daughters, perhaps Caroline, may have contributed to her passing later that year. Several references to trips to the Wilson residence in 1859-1860 to treat the girl for unidentified ailments may be found in Dr. Warren's notes. He made the following notation. Agitation continues unabated. Father refuses recommended course of treatment, insists on home care only. Prognosis uncertain. The entries abruptly stop after Eleanor Wilson's death, indicating that William Wilson stopped providing his daughter with professional medical care at that time. For a book about historical cases of shared psychosis, a psychologist by the name of Dr. Robert Finch tried to replicate the case in 1968. As part of his investigation, he spoke with a number of senior citizens in McConnellville who had hazy recollections of Charlotte Daring. One woman, Martha Keller, who had grown up in the 1890 seconds, remembered something out of the ordinary. Her grandmother, Elizabeth Simmons, had been a housekeeper for a number of well-known families in McConnellville in the 1880 seconds and 1890 seconds. "My grandmother used to clean for the Darings once a month," she once told me, very quietly, that she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Two identical women sitting in the kitchen when she arrived early one day. After that, she was never allowed inside without sending word ahead first. Martha said that Elizabeth had described the Deering household as having strange rules. She was only allowed to clean specific parts of the house and was never allowed to go upstairs without permission. On some days when she would arrive, the house would appear to be deserted, even though the food and dishes had been prepared, as though someone had just left the house just before her arrival. Elizabeth once claimed to have heard music coming from a piano on the second floor. However, when she brought it up to Charlotte, she was abruptly informed that since there was no piano in the home, it must have been a neighbor's instrument that she had heard. Elizabeth, however, emphasized to her family that during a prior visit, she had not only heard the music clearly, but had also caught a sight of a piano in an upstairs room via a half-open door. Dr. Finch's untimely death in 1969 ended his studies, but his notes, which were preserved, contained a fascinating fact he had discovered in the documents of a Columbus mental hospital. A woman who fit Carolyn Wilson's description had been briefly committed there in 1866 at the age of 19 before being released into family care. The admission notes mentioned disruptive behavior, refusal to conform to societal expectations, and dangerous ideation. The intake records described the patient as well-spoken but unpredictable, given to sudden agitation and inappropriate emotional displays. The examining physician wrote, "Patient exhibits periods of complete lucidity, interspersed with troubling episodes of what can only be described as a secondary personality emerging, one that is considerably more assertive and less restrained by social propriety." After just 3 weeks, the patient was released against medical recommendation into the custody of her father, who signed a document assuming full responsibility for her management. During these episodes, she insists on being addressed by another name, though the family assures me she has no sister. The doctor tried to check on the patient's status 6 months later, according to a follow-up note, but William Wilson told him that his daughter had fully recovered and required no further medical attention. This finding brought up an interesting question. Was it Charlotte who was committed, keeping the family visible in public while she was away? Or had Caroline been institutionalized for a short time before the choice was made to hide her at home? Although the records don't offer a conclusive response, they do raise the possibility that the pattern of identity substitution and concealment started earlier than previously believed. Additional pieces of the Daring narrative were discovered in the early 1970 seconds by local historian Agnes Patterson. Patterson discovered that Thomas Daring bought an abnormally high amount of soundproofing supplies in 1886, including dense woolen carpeting, felt padding, and horsehair insulation. According to documents of his construction company, these things come at the same time as the farmhouse underwent yet another round of improvements that the neighbors remembered but that the building permits never recorded. Additionally, Patterson discovered the documents of a Zanesville locksmith who, between 1886 and 1890, had constructed a number of unique locking devices for Thomas Daring. The locksmith's notes show that these were for storage areas containing valuable tools. The specifications called for locks that could be operated from either side with different keys, so that one key would unlock the door but not lock it, while another key could both lock and unlock it. Patterson's interviews with the descendants of families who had resided close to the Daring property may have yielded the most unsettling findings. A family tradition was related by Harriet Collins, whose grandparents had farmed the nearby area in the 1890 seconds. My grandmother told my mother that sometimes at night, she would hear a woman calling from the direction of the Deering house. Not screaming exactly, but calling out, as if trying to get someone's attention. My grandfather dismissed it as an owl or a fox, but my grandmother was certain it was a human voice. She said it always seemed to come from the top floor of the house, and always after dark. Over the course of the 20th century, the Deering farmhouse underwent multiple ownership changes. The owner at the time claimed to have discovered a hoard of identical gowns in a sealed trunk in the cellar in 1958. The dresses were all in the 1892nd style, and were all the same size. Eventually, the gowns vanished into the costume collection of a theater group to which they were donated. When the property underwent extensive renovations in 1964, the most unsettling finding was made. A little area beneath the kitchen floor, about the size of a big steamer trunk, was discovered by workers dismantling a portion of the old foundation. It was lined with lead and secured with a complex locking mechanism. The space was too small to have held a person for any length of time, but its careful construction and hidden location suggested a purpose beyond simple storage. They discovered only one woman's shoe, a hairbrush with long dark strands, and a page torn from a book with a handwritten note in the margin. Remember who you are when no one is watching. The workers who found the space were clearly disturbed by it, according to Robert Jenkins, the property owner at the time. One of them, an older fellow who'd been in construction for decades, just walked off the job that afternoon and never came back. Jenkins stated. Wouldn't say why, just that he wanted nothing more to do with the house. Jenkins gave the objects discovered in the secret area to the Morgan County Historical Society, where they were included in the tiny collection of relics related to Deering. The book page featured emphasized portions about a character living under a false identity and was recognized as being from a popular novel from the 1880 seconds. Experts in handwriting have examined the marginal comment and determined that it is consistent with the flowing cursive, most likely that of Caroline, that can be seen in several of the Deering journals. Interest in the Deering case periodically reappeared throughout the 1970 seconds, especially following the release of a speculative article titled "The Woman Who Was Two" in the Columbus Dispatch in 1973. Although the article was based on historical records, it made significant changes to reconstruct conversations and events for which there was no documentation. In order to keep control over Carolyn's identity and marriage, it depicted Charlotte as the cunning sister who gradually imprisoned her. Eliza Deering Murray, a distant relative of Thomas Deering who was still residing in southeast Ohio, responded to the piece. She protested this depiction in a letter to the editor. "The story handed down in our family suggests a much more complex situation," she stated. "According to my grandfather, who knew Thomas personally, both women were victims of circumstance rather than each other. The arrangement began as mutual protection, but evolved into mutual imprisonment, with neither sister able to live a complete life, and both dependent on the fiction they had created." The Deering farmhouse was scheduled for demolition in 1977 to make space for agricultural expansion after it had become dilapidated after being abandoned for a number of years. A team from Ohio University's Department of History documented the building in detail before it was demolished, taking measurements and taking pictures of each room and architectural element. Many of the unique features mentioned in previous tales were validated by their study, including the attic bedroom with its reinforced door, the lead-lined room in the basement, and the hidden staircase. Additionally, they found something that had been missed in earlier inspections: a tiny gap in the wall between the master bedroom and the room next to it. Hidden behind a hinged panel that appeared like a decorative element, someone in one room might have seen the other without being noticed thanks to the gap, which was about 6 inches square. The documentation team's lead, Dr. Helen Richards, hypothesized that this capability could account for some of the diary entries indicating one sister was keeping tabs on the other. This arrangement would have allowed for a strange sort of surveillance. She noted in her report, "One could imagine Charlotte checking on a sedated Caroline, or perhaps Caroline watching Charlotte's interactions with Thomas, observing the life she was denied." In June 1977, the farmhouse was dismantled. The demolition was characterized by a number of odd events. according to a number of workers who were there that day. A section of wall that suddenly collapsed, narrowly missing a worker. A persistent cold spot in the attic that defied the summer heat, and tools that vanished only to be discovered in other places. These all contributed to the property's increasing legend. Even though they could all be ascribed to natural causes, an old structure is unpredictable during deconstruction. Many creative versions of the Deering case have been created in the decades since, including plays, books, and even a little-known independent film from 1992. The majority frequently introduce supernatural components that are completely absent from the actual instance, taking considerable artistic license with the historical record. But embellishment is not necessary to upset the truth. The Daring twins' psychological horror is rooted in the more horrifying truth of human deceit, manipulation, and self-delusion, rather than in spectral appearances or demonic possession. A community that refused to see what was in front of them. Two women who were identical in appearance and caught in a toxic web of shared identity. A husband who allowed their deception while being deceived himself. And finally, a death that could have been suicide, murder, or something else entirely. The final combining of two lives that had become inextricably linked. According to the documents, Charlotte Daring, or the woman known as Charlotte, was laid to rest in the McConnellville Cemetery following the conclusion of the investigation in 1901. In addition to her name and the years 1847 to 1901, the gravestone, which is still visible today despite being worn by time, has the intriguing statement, "Never truly alone." It is unclear whether this was intended as consolation or confession, and like so much else about the Daring twins, it will always be a mystery. When an old woman came to the cemetery in 1982, she laid flowers on Charlotte's tomb. She refused to disclose her name and merely introduced herself as a relative from Columbus when the groundskeeper approached her. She remained beside the cemetery for almost an hour, speaking gently at times as though speaking to the dead, and the groundskeeper later described her as elegant but frail, like a bird that had weathered too many storms. She set a small item on top of the grave before she left, a locket with two matching dark hairs linked with ribbons of various colors. Unsure of what to do with it, the groundskeeper finally gave it to the Morgan County Historical Society, where it was placed with the other items related to the Daring. Subsequent analysis revealed that, although genetically identical, the hair originated from two distinct people, which is consistent with twins. The two ribbons, one green and one blue, correspond to entries in the journals about how, as children, the sisters would occasionally mark their clothes covertly to identify them. Unusual noises, sometimes characterized as whispers and other times as the creak of rocking chairs, have been heard by certain cemetery visitors close to the grave. Most people blame this on winding through the ancient oaks that shade that area of the cemetery. Sometimes, however, someone would insist that they heard two different voices speaking simultaneously. A solitary house key that reportedly belonged to the hidden staircase, a page from one of the journals, and the photograph of the identical women are among the few items from the Daring case that are still on exhibit in the small museum run by the County Historical Society. Even though the case is always kept locked, the museum curator claims that sometimes these things are discovered reconfigured. Significant issues regarding perception and identity are brought up by the Daring case. How hard would it have been for two identical ladies to keep up the illusion that they were one person in a late 19th century rural hamlet with few interactions and no documentation? To what extent did the residents of McConnellville actually fail to see, and to what extent did they refuse to recognize? The arrangement might have been an early recorded example of folie à deux, a shared psychotic condition in which symptoms are passed from one person to another, according to Dr. Elaine Foster, a psychiatrist who investigated the case in the 1990 seconds. The isolation of the farmhouse, the intense bond between identical twins, and the stresses of maintaining their deception could have created the perfect conditions for a progressive detachment from reality, she stated. This theory could help explain some of the more contradictory elements in the journals, such as passages where the writer appears unsure of which sister she is, or entries that describe the same event from seemingly opposing perspectives. Over time, the boundaries between their identities may have blurred, with each sister simultaneously maintaining the fiction and believing in it. It could also account for the last journal entry, which hinted that the difference between them was no longer important. An archivist at the Ohio Historical Society appended a brief note to the file in 1969, which is the last official record pertaining to the Daring case. It goes on to say, upon careful examination of all available evidence, it remains impossible to determine which sister's body was discovered in 1901, or indeed if either identity can be considered more real than the other. Perhaps after decades of trading places, even they no longer knew which was which. While cleaning out a family estate in Pennsylvania in 2003, a descendant of Thomas Daring's brother discovered a small, leather-bound notepad, which is an odd addition to the case. Apart from the journals discovered in the farmhouse, the notebook seems to hold Thomas's personal ideas. In one 1893 entry, he wrote, "I sometimes wonder if I am losing my own grip on reality. Today, C came to me with concerns about her sister's behavior. Yet an hour later, when I sought to discuss the matter further, she had no recollection of our conversation, and when I pressed her, she became agitated, insisting she had been in the garden all morning. Either my mind is failing, or their deception has reached a point where even they cannot maintain its boundaries." This suggests that toward the end of Thomas's life, the meticulous system of trading places had started to disintegrate, with each sister possibly acting independently of their established patterns, causing confusion even for the one person who was supposed to understand their arrangement. Even more concerning is another entry that was made about a month before Thomas passed away. I no longer know which of them I am speaking to at any given moment. The distinctions that once seemed so clear have blurred. Sometimes I see Caroline's spontaneity in Charlotte's gestures, or Charlotte's precise manner in Caroline's expressions. They have become like actresses who have played the same role for so long that neither remembers who originally learned the lines. If Thomas, who lived with the twins every day, was unable to tell them apart, what hope did townspeople or occasional visitors have? This could be the reason why those who knew Charlotte after Thomas's passing thought her conduct was so unpredictable. Without Thomas to keep them on track or resolve their disputes, they were probably interacting with both sisters, each of whom was behaving as Charlotte as they saw fit. Researchers and the general public are still captivated by the Daring twins' narrative because of its significant psychological ramifications rather than any supernatural aspects. After sharing a face, two women ended up sharing a life, or rather, half a life each, since neither was able to live fully or on her own. The farmhouse is no longer there, and the tangible proof of their peculiar setup has been dispersed and destroyed. Since then, the area where it once stood has undergone innumerable cultivations and harvests, destroying any remnant of the building that held their secret. However, their story endures in part because it is ingrained in McConnellville's collective consciousness and is maintained in the disjointed material that has survived them. The location of the former farmhouse may be visible as you drive through McConnellville today. Now, there is only a small stand of trees and wide pastures. However, residents claim that if you pause at dusk and listen intently, you may occasionally hear the faint sound of rocking chairs creaking in unison. The sound ends the instant you attempt to identify its source. The lingering echo of a life divided, of identities shattered and fused until separation became impossible, was not a haunting in the conventional sense. A reminder that in the quiet places between who we are and who we pretend to be, we may sometimes create the most unsettling hauntings for ourselves. What is unknown about the Daring case may be more disturbing than what is known. Was one sister purposefully eradicating the other in order to assert exclusive control over their common identity? Did they decide together that only one of them could go on? Or had their differences become so blurred that they were no longer relevant in the end? In actuality, they were now two parts of a single, broken whole. The Daring case served as the foundation for a 2005 study on identity creation and preservation conducted by an Ohio State University psychology professor. According to her, the journal's alternating handwriting and points of view made them a singular historical record of identity breakdown. The slow blending of two separate selves into an unsteady hybrid that could never support either. The Wilson twins developed a solution to their predicament. that ultimately turned into a jail for them both. They were born during a time when women's liberty was severely restricted and mental health care was at best rudimentary. What started out as a means of protection keeping Carolyn out of institutional confinement became a complicated web of dependency and control from which neither could break free. According to a moving diary entry, "We are like two insects caught in the same web. Each struggle for freedom only entangles us both more completely." Morgan County's undulating hills conceal a lot of mysteries. Some are buried deep in the memories of old homes and elder generations, while others are whispered about and recorded in dwindling records. However, few have left as lasting an impression as the tale of the ladies who lived and possibly perished as Charlotte Daring. The questions they leave us with, rather than the answers, might ultimately be their greatest legacy. How much of who we are is determined by what other people think of us? What occurs when we are compelled to live a life that is not true to who we really are? And how quickly, in the correct circumstances, can the lines separating reality from fiction, between self and other, blur? Perhaps as it should be, the enigma surrounding the Daring twins is still unresolved and insoluble over a century later. Some secrets lose their ability to provoke us to consider our own hidden identities, our own deceitful tendencies, and the masks we all wear in various situations once they are fully revealed. In handwriting that appears to blend aspects of the styles of both sisters, one of the last diary entries writes, "In the end, perhaps there never were two of us at all. Perhaps there was only ever one woman living two half-lives, neither of them real."